Right. Happy Friday, everyone. Um, Breaking news on tax again. I mean, there's always going to be breaking news on tax issues as we get close to the budget, which still remember is like 1.5 weeks away. But the latest, when I wake up this morning, the latest is apparently that Labour have U-turned on their plans to break the manifesto promise and increase the rate of like at least one rate of income tax. Now, Eddie has just said there, can't you turn what was never announced? Well, no, this is the interest. I mean, there's lots of things to discuss here. Let's start with that point. It's not necessarily the chronologically starting point, but let's start with it. Yes, that's absolutely true. Labour did not announce that they were going to break the manifesto at all. And I did actually say earlier this week, I sort of hope in some ways that Labour punks some of the mainstream media, not the whole thing. I don't think Labour should just go on the attack against the news, right? Because, you need to have a decent working relationship with them. And some of them give you a fair hearing, but some of them don't. So I would certainly use it on that. So what's happened here is, again, we can't be absolutely certain. Just because what's happened, right? What's happened is the Treasury worked out various ways of fixing the hole, basically, if you want to call it that. And they send them off to the OBR so the OBR can do their calculations. Because again, remember what I've kept saying. The sole purpose of this budget, it's not because Labour need more spending, although there are a couple of things they do. They do need to find the money for removing or at least scaling back the 2-child cap on universal credit. They do need to now find the money for those disability cuts that they thought they could get away with and didn't. So, okay, there is some new money that is needed, but that's about, I can't remember what it's about, but it's not an excessive amount. Although I suppose anything these days is excessive. But mostly the reason for this budget is because the OBR's model says that at the moment, our national debt will not fall as a share of our GDP over 5 years. I will keep pointing out that the error in that model is greater than the amount they think it's out by, but there's nothing you can do about that. So that's the only reason for it. So Rachel Reeves isn't trying to muck about with the budget to, beyond those couple of things, find more money. She's just trying to get the OBR's model to say, yeah, it's good. Debt's going to fall, right? So the Treasury will have sent lots and lots of things to the OBR, some of which they won't have really wanted to do. They were just doing it to test it out. They just wanted lots of OBR models to come back with, well, which one is the least politically painful to go with? That's all. So it is possible that they never really wanted to increase the rate of income tax, but we just got the impression they probably were seriously thinking about it. And the reason why the view turned is almost certainly because Keir Starmer's close team, his immediate allies, are idiots, right? They are idiots. In order to try and deal with the threat of a leadership challenge, which probably wasn't all that serious, it's always like, there's always some of that, especially when you're doing badly in the polls. It's inevitable. It's just part and parcel of politics, right? You cannot seriously expect to be in a strong position as a prime minister when you're polling in second place by some margin. That's just ridiculous. If anyone thinks you can just be business as usual if you're not topping the polls as prime minister, you don't know anything about politics. But in their attempt to try and deal with the issue, they made it way worse. So what's happened is Keir Starmer's position is now much weaker. And if there is going to be a leadership challenge, breaking a manifesto promise is a really good excuse for triggering one, isn't it? So what they've now clearly decided, I say clearly, again, it's speculation, but probably decided is, right, we cannot afford to give anyone an excuse to trigger a leadership or a confidence vote, right? So they've decided against it. But, like you say, they never formally announced that they were going to break the manifesto. They never formally announced they were going to increase income. Well, I think they still are going to increase income tax, but without breaking the manifesto, right? Because the the manifesto promise was not that they wouldn't increase income tax, by the way. I mean, they have increased income tax technically by maintaining the freeze on the boundaries that the Tories put in place. And they're likely to, well, I say likely, they're almost certain to extend that because that's politically the easiest way. The only way you can find yourself trapped by fiscal drag and paying a higher rate of income tax is if you're getting paid more. So, you know, that's the least painful because no one's going to be losing money effectively out of fiscal drag, or very few would be in reality. You just pay a higher rate of tax, that's all. But that means also you're earning more and therefore taking home more. But there is another way they can increase income tax without breaking the manifesto promise. In fact, there are two other ways. The way I said before, and I've said for right back since last year, is the promise was just to not raise the rate of the basic, the higher and the additional rates. It didn't say that they wouldn't add an extra. They could have easily inserted an extra rate, like a super additional rate or something. But they're not going to do that. But what it sounds like they might do, and this wouldn't break the manifesto promise, what they could do is they could reduce the boundaries. So at the moment, there's, let me just have a quick remind myself, it's about 50 to 51,000, I think, at the top of the basic rate. Let me just double check. So the basic rate goes from £12,571 to £50,270. So basically, any income you get between £12,571 and £50,270, you pay a 20% tax rate. Anything above £50,270, you pay 40%. So it's a big jump up, right? So this is why, you know, and you notice Labour have said that the workers they're going to protect from taxes are those earning up to, what was it, £46,000? So what if they reduced the ceiling of the basic rate from £50,270 to, say, I don't know, £46,270? So that would make more people pay more income tax, but it wouldn't break the manifesto. Now, it's not just the case that they shouldn't break the manifesto. That can still piss people off, but it wouldn't be a broken promise. So if they're going to raise income tax for some people anyway, they could do that and it'd be totally within the manifesto. Anyway, I'll catch up with a couple of comments here because there are other things that add into this. As per usual, you get the right-wingers saying Labour always makes a mess of the economy. Well, I mean, the reality is, and again, this isn't being talked about in any of the media, we've now had a fourth quarter in a row. I should have got this. I've just been really busy, I'm afraid, this week. But this is now, obviously, so we've just had the latest economic data. In a couple of months, expect it to be revised. Because it was only like very small amount of growth, it could be revised down, but it could be revised up. Sometimes it's actually been revised up. But nonetheless, in the here and now, Labour have grown the economy in every quarter since they came to power. That's now 4 quarters in a row. I cannot remember the last time. I'm going to try and find it. I'm going to try and find... let me see if I can find... If I had longer, I'd be... Oh, no, that's no good. What I want is some data on the... let's have a look. No, that's too old. I want something recent. I'm trying to find... I will be able to find if I had more time. The growth per quarter, the GDP growth stroke contraction. Let me have a little look here. See if this has got it. Oh, this is, I've got it per month. I want it per quarter. Right. Quarterly GDP growth for UK. I'm going to put since 2010 and hope for the best. I'll just put over time. Maybe that'll get me something better. Why is it so hard? Everyone measures it per quarter. Why is it so bloody hard to find? Right, so let's have a look. One, two, three, four. I've got one that goes back to 2020. It'll be way before 2020. This will be the last time there were 3 quarters in a row was 2022. But when was the last time there were 4 quarters in a row? That's what I'm trying to find out, and it's proving to be very difficult. I'll have a look later. But nonetheless, it's the longest sustained period of growth we've had for years. It's not good. It's not strong growth. It's not high. But in terms of sustained growth, it's still better than it's been for years. Is it still technically increased like Tories or something more substantial? Yeah, it's not substantial. It's not at all substantial. No. But again, like Labour's plan to grow the economy, because again, like Daisy Cooper was saying with the Lib Dems, was saying, right, why don't we talk about growth? Why don't we talk about growth? Well, why don't we talk about growth? What causes growth? Labour's plan for growth is investment. Well, you can't do that overnight. The investment is being supplied, but the stuff that investment's building takes some years. So it's like one of these things where it's like, what's your aim to grow the economy? How do you grow the economy? You can grow with investment. You can invest in public services, but also those services are used by businesses. That's one way of investing. Well, you can't expect strong growth straight away. What's another way? The Tories think just by cutting taxes. But they did that and it didn't encourage, our economy shrunk while they were in power. So, there's no discussion about what is the mechanism by which Labour are attempting to grow the economy. If there were, you would be able to say, well, it's with this investment. Well, do you get the growth as soon as you announce that investment? No. It needs to be before the next election. They need to be showing stronger growth by the next election. If it was the Tories, it wouldn't matter. The media would just say, oh, don't worry, it's coming, it's coming. Do we know the reason for the unemployment rise? There are multiple reasons, one of which is indeed, as people would have suggested last year, the fact that, in terms of major reasons cited, the national insurance rise, the employers' national insurance rise last year did hamper recruitment. Right. So that is one reason. That has created one reason. Another reason is, of course, Trump's tariffs. If you can't sell as much, and remember, it's not just, although you'd think, so we've got Trump's tariffs, that has produced a friction in our trade, because America's a very big market, and it's a very big market for us. So it's now, and the figures are out, our trade with America has been reduced. Of course it has, bloody tariffs. If you're a business and you can't sell as much, you don't hire as many people. And it's not like, because you might think to yourself, well, in parallel, we've been trying to get closer trade with like other countries, with India, with the EU, for example, looking at Canada. But none of those things have actually translated anything yet. The India trade deal doesn't apply straight away. So it'll be some time before that. And I don't know how much that's going to affect it. It's not very much. The EU trade deal would be better, but again, nothing's formalised. And they're not going to formalise anything until we implement the Windsor Framework properly. So we could actually be exporting more to the EU if we would just hurry up and implement the Windsor Framework properly. And I don't know what the hold-up there is. Is it that there's just a natural hold-up because you can't do that overnight? Or is it that Labour are reluctant for political reasons? I don't know. But, you know, the Trump tariffs have had an immediate negative effect on our economy. All of the positive trade talks we've had with other countries don't come into effect straight away. So those really, and then the thing about Labour's investment. So, I mean, they've talked about 800,000 jobs, extra jobs in the green sector by 2030. Well, again, they haven't been created yet. The extra jobs that might appear in construction with extra building, again, are only just starting to filter through. So those are the reasons. Like, there's been multiple things that have put a drag on jobs growth. The employers' national insurance from last year, although people overblow it, but it still had an effect. Trump's tariffs had an immediate effect. There's also the fact that consumer confidence is a bit subdued at the moment because people aren't sure what the budget's going to bring. This is why Rachel Reeves sort of had the right idea last year. She wanted to say, this is the budget for the whole Parliament. That way you wouldn't get this sort of uncertainty as budget approached. She just wanted to say, we're just going to keep on, it's fine. We're going to announce a budget every year, but it's not really going to change apart from a few tweaks. That's what she wanted to do, but she wasn't able to do that. Food prices, especially for meat and dairy, increasing too fast, though. Food and energy are still the main drivers of inflation. And I suppose if you're talking about the inflation that's really in people's minds, you're talking about food, energy, and accommodation, like rents. Not so much mortgages, because interest rates are going down. However, remember, even though interest rates are going down, if people are coming off their fixed terms round about now, the interest rates are still higher than they were the last time they fixed them. So even some mortgages are still going up. So yeah, costs of accommodation, costs of energy, costs of food are the main issues. The food, they might be able to do. The food, though, is coming down. The inflation of that over 2026, like this time next year, according to the Bank of England, this time next year, it shouldn't be as big a deal. But I am also going to caution that all sorts of things can put pressure on food prices. Climate change is a huge one because it creates bad harvests. It destroys agricultural land. We're playing a losing battle with food prices when it comes to climate. But the belief is that it should be much less noticeable next year. And if it carries on over the next few years, be much less noticeable. If people aren't, there's always food price inflation, but as long as people aren't, as long as it's not going up all the time or too much, and people don't notice it, then it should be fine for the next election. Energy is something that Labour are trying to deal with now. They're trying to deal with it artificially. The best way to deal with that, which is hopefully what they're doing for the next election, is stop pegging the price to gas, which they can do if they do complete this transition to cleaner forms of energy for the next election. You've got the SMRs, yes, the small modular reactors. Again, they've announced this year, pissed off Trump because they're using Rolls-Royce for it. They're a bit more untested, though. Those small nuclear reactors, those small modular reactors, they're not terribly well tested. But also solar and wind, big ones. So if they can, that should be a way, hopefully, of getting energy prices down significantly. In the short term, the budget looks like what it might do. It might get rid of VAT on energy. That is one way to suddenly reduce the bills. It's also something that the energy companies will have to pass on because VAT is shown separately on energy bills. And she's also talking about getting rid of the green levies. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everything the green levies funds will stop, but it sounds like some of it will. But that's another thing. That's also another thing that Reform UK poke at. So they may see that there's two advantages in that. First of all, the bills go down. Second of all, it doesn't become a bone of contention for Reform UK because the things that are still be funded out of it will come from general taxation. But anyway. Daniel, they're saying it's a shame that it will now affect budget strategy, but thank God no manifesto will be broken. So yes, breaking a manifesto promise is a very big deal, particularly when it's a big, noisy manifesto promise that you made. It was very much a key feature of the election campaign. It is better. It's better if they're going to raise income tax, and it does still sound to me like they're going to increase income tax. If they're going to increase income tax by massaging the boundaries, which could still be politically tricky, it's at least better that you can say, well, we haven't broken a promise. Because if they can get to the next election by saying we haven't broken any of our promises, and that anything that doesn't look like it's been done, they say it is still underway, though. We are still meeting that obligation. As long as you cannot definitively say they've broken a manifesto promise. There's two advantages. First of all, your next manifesto looks more credible. Secondly, you get to attack Reform UK for the contradictory promises they're making. Because it would be laughable. Labour at the next election, Reform UK are trying to claim contradictory things. So Labour will be pointing out that they will have to break, some certain promises have to be broken because they're promising things that are mutually exclusive. It would be laughable for Labour to go into the next election accusing Reform UK of intending to break their promises if they've broken a big one. So it is better that they don't break the manifesto. Labour ought to at least raise taxes somewhat so as to get the money moving again. Well, they will be doing. The other thing is, one thing that keeps coming through the reporting, the sensible reporting, that Rachel Reeves is trying to do, she's not just trying to close the gap. The gap may not be that big. What she's trying to do is give herself loads of headroom. One mistake, and to be fair, lots of economists said Rachel Reeves was making a mistake last year, and so it has proven to be. She gave herself very little headroom. When Rachel Reeves announced her budget last October, she gave herself about £10 billion worth of headroom. In other words, the forecast could go out by about £10 billion and she'd just about be okay. But if it was any more than that, all of a sudden she's not. And it was, and people like the Financial Times and Bloomberg and so on were saying £10 billion is not enough. It's not enough headroom, especially given that they would have known at the time Trump hadn't won the election, but he was a few days away from it. But he could have, they knew that it was a serious risk and they knew he'd been promising tariffs and they knew that that would do a lot of damage. So it was ridiculous. Rachel Reeves's big problem last year was that she didn't give herself enough headroom. Now, the reason she didn't give herself enough headroom is because she would have had to have raised taxes, difficult, awkward taxes, without an obvious need to do so, just purely for the purposes of headroom. So that's why she didn't. I understand the logic, but it has bitten her on the arse. And you know what? The sensible economics writers were right. She should have given herself more headroom. Grim fan there saying, just got here, right pig's ear of this. The pre-budget speech should have shut down speculation. Instead, it made it worse. Absolute joke. Well, I don't know that it's made it worse because on the one hand, they actually literally can't announce we're definitely doing this in the budget because you're supposed to announce it to Parliament first. And also, if you change your mind, you then do look like a prize prawn. So Labour haven't actually announced anything that they're U-turning on. It's just that we know they are U-turning, but they haven't announced it. And nor could they. But at the same time, if you're planning on doing something tricky, you do have to get it out there because you've got to gauge public opinion. Like, if you look at the winter fuel allowance, that was a pig's breakfast, and that was done because they announced it without checking. They didn't even like say, they never should have done it for last winter. If they were going to do it at all, they should have said for the following winter, which would be this winter, and they should have thrown out the idea without saying anything definite. Because remember, they announced it. They announced it as soon as they came to power. It's like pretty much the first thing Rachel Reeves did within the first few weeks. And what they, and they did that because they had to announce it that early if they were going to do it straight away. They shouldn't have done it straight away. It wasn't going to save that much straight away. Even across the entire Parliament doesn't save that much, but it wasn't going to save them much straight away. So what they should have done was talk about a few of the, as soon as Rachel Reeves says, look, there's this £20 billion black hole, whatever, right? £20 billion black hole that the Tories have left us. They lied about it. We've got the OBR in. They've confirmed that, yes, this was not, they weren't informed about it. So we're going to have to do a few things. These are some of the things we might do. And then she could have mentioned, we're looking at the winter fuel allowance to see if not this winter, she could have said, not this winter, we're not going to do anything this quickly, but for the following winter, do we maybe means test it? She could have thrown that out there, right? And then if it ended up with a big backlash, would never have appeared in the budget. So actually, no, I'm going to sort of say the opposite. Although it can look like they've made a right pig's breakfast of laying the groundwork for a manifesto break and then U-turn on it, I am going to say if you're going to do anything controversial, it is better that you test the waters and then look like you've basically pulled your foot out quick than it is to just jump in. Because then you're committed. As soon as you've announced something, then it's a big deal if you reverse it. Why don't Labour raise the amount you pay on each threshold and create a new higher band while taking people earning £25,000 or less out of income taxation altogether? It costs too much. People overestimate the amount of income that there is in the country because they think there's all this wealth that if you just have a higher rate of income tax, well, because again, it's all these bullshit merchants like Richard Bergen and people like that. Whereas they're lying. It's not true. There isn't that much high income in the country. There's a lot of, in terms of what would be liable for income tax. Because again, I've done this a few times, but I'll just try and explain it as simply as I can. If you have, right, let's say you have an income of £2 million a year from wherever, your business or whatever, you've got an income of £2 million a year. You don't have an income of £2 million a year. What you would do with that, because what do you do with that money? What does an ordinary person do? If you've got an income of £20,000 a year, right, and let's say that's enough for you to live on, you have a little bit, or let's say more realistically, maybe £30,000, and roughly in the part of the country I am. So you've got a little bit of money for saving. Well, you put a bit in the bank for emergencies, right? That's it. But if you've got £2 million a year, you don't put it in the bank because that's just stupid. Because then in a few years' time, it's not worth as much. What you do is you invest it. So if you've got an income of £2 million a year, okay, you've got outgoings, right? And you've probably got a lot of outgoings because you've probably got a big posh house, right? But once you've worked out the money you need to spend, the rest of it goes into investments. And those investments give a return. And you don't pay income tax on those returns. You probably pay capital gains tax. And the same thing with other investments. So if you were to have a higher rate of income, which you could, and you would raise some extra money from it, you wouldn't raise that much. Whereas everyone pays income tax at the basic rate of income tax, everyone pays that. So if you were to raise the personal allowance to you're talking about £25,000. That's even more extreme than Reform UK we're talking about. You're talking about literally doubling the personal allowance. Everyone pays that basic rate of tax. Everyone, rich and poor. Well, everyone earning over 12,500 anyway. So you would be talking about tens of billions of pounds being wiped off the Treasury tax returns. And you wouldn't gain anything nearly that much at the top end. So there really isn't that much scope for generating a lot of extra income tax purely at the top end, because at the top end, they don't really pay much income tax because it's all in investments. That's why also, if you look at, even if you think about people who do genuinely get paid as a salary, millions of pounds, they don't. If you look at CEOs of big corporations, a lot of the time they don't get paid a salary. They do get a salary, but their salary is not their whole income. They get a salary and share options and stuff, don't they? Why? Because you don't pay income tax on them. You don't pay income tax. So very, very big earners don't pay a lot of income tax. So raising income tax at the top end, it can raise you a bit extra. I'm not saying it wouldn't be worth it if you could like create an extra band that was maybe like 49%, maybe. Let's say above 500,000 or something. It would raise something extra. Well, maybe, again, this is where you get into like the problems of, will more people then convert their income into something else? Because the more you tax people who have options, again, if you're very wealthy, you can take your pay in various forms, right? You don't have to take it in money. You can take it in like shares and stuff sometimes. So you might encourage more of that. So maybe you don't raise that much. But income tax, yeah, that's just purely trying to squeeze the top end, wouldn't. If you're going to increase income tax, you're going to have to hit everyone. That's the reality of it. Is there scope for raising capital gains tax more? I think so. But again, you know, you do have to have one of these things. Capital gains tax, if the more you raise that, the more you hit investments. Well, Rachel Reeves is trying to encourage people to invest more. So it's one of these things, isn't it? The reason why we don't really tax pension contributions, although that could be getting shrunk, but the reason why we don't tax pension contributions is because the government wants to encourage you to pay into a pension so that there'll be less poverty in the retired population. And because if you've got poor pensioners, the state pension doesn't cover it, then you need more people on other benefits like pension credit, don't you? So it's in the government's interest to persuade you to have a separate pension, a works pension, private pension, whatever. So they encourage it by, you know, not charging you tax on your pension contributions. The same thing applies to investment. If you've got a government that wants more people to invest, then increasing the taxes on those investments works against it. So that's another problem. There is no easy answer. For me, I wish someone would explain it to me. Land tax is surely the path of least resistance, but it clearly isn't, because no one's even talking. Well, the economists are, but the Treasury is not even talking about land tax. And I really wish I knew why, because I'm thinking to myself, it's currently, I mean, I'm not talking about all land. I mean, if it's got property on it, it's got property on it. We have property tax already. But land that doesn't have property on it, like, why aren't we taxing it? There's no tax on it. There's no tax on it. Leave farms alone, but other than that, just tax the shit out of it. Or at least tax it a bit. If you tax it a bit, you don't hit investment, you don't dissuade investment. In fact, because again, if you think about taxes as being something that dissuades you from doing stuff, all it's dissuading you from doing is owning land that you don't do anything with. Well, okay, I think we can afford to dissuade that. Last few comments here on the shutting down speculation point. They don't need to commit to anything, but say enough to shut down speculation. Maybe say what might be coming, but say what is most likely to be updated, avoided. Well, no, they can't do that either, because they don't know. Even right now, Rachel Reeves has not finished her budget. Like, as soon as she's finished it, she wants to announce it. Now, she's set herself a date, so she has given herself a definitive date. But if Rachel Reeves could have finished the budget by now, she'd want to announce it by now. Because the period of time leading up to the budget is always dodgy. It suppresses consumer confidence, it suppresses business confidence. So as soon as she's got the budget ready, she wants to announce it. And so there is no way to shut down speculation, because the speculation is valid, because they don't know what they're ruling in and out, even now. If the reason why they've decided they're not going to raise any of the rates of income tax is because of the risk that it gives an excuse to people wanting to trigger a leadership election. But that's basically it. Add in savings from people claiming fewer benefits, higher growth from increased velocity of money. The problem then is you're hitting the poor, because people don't choose to have benefits. Some people seem to choose to do without them because they don't apply for ones they're eligible for, but no one chooses to have them. They have them because they need them, or in most cases. Again, I don't think they should do anything that actively punishes people for not having enough money for savings. That would be a pretty bad option. Limit bloody share options. I don't know how you can do that though, because at the end of the day, you can pay someone in whatever you like, right? Remember, before we had money, people used to buy things with just it's bartering, wasn't it? It's like, you give me that sack of wool, I'll give you this pig, right? You can't stop people being paid in whatever they would like. Money is just a very convenient way to pay people. But if you want to offer, if someone wants to exchange their labour in return for something else in kind, then that's fine. The only way around it really is to decide that all income is income and liable to income tax and not have capital gains tax. But then that would also get quite messy for ordinary people as well. Like, let's say you buy something, an antique or something, and then years later you sell it for more money. It might not be more money in real terms, but you do sell it for more money. Then at the moment you pay capital gains on that. Whereas, and if you don't get as much, you don't pay anything because there's an allowance on capital gains as well. So most ordinary people don't get caught out by selling stuff that they've had for years, like an heirloom or something. Whereas if it had to be classed as income, you'd be breaking the law. So you'd have to make more people more savvy about tax. The best way to reduce welfare spend is for companies to pay low and middle incomes better to stop effective wage subsidy through benefits. It is, but again, for that you need, the only way to do that is to keep gradually increasing the minimum wage. You couldn't, in all honesty, like Labour could not, in all honesty, come straight into power and decide to set the minimum wage at what was the real living wage, because then unemployment would be way high. You'd have sent loads of businesses to the wall, and it's all right saying, I will say to businesses who complain about it, I say, well, that's because you're bad at business. And it's like, well, yeah, they are. But we have to remember obviously most businesses are small businesses, but even most of the people employed are employed by small and medium-sized businesses, not big businesses. So, and most small and medium-sized businesses are not run by people who are good at business. They're run by people who are good at producing the thing that they could sell. They're not necessarily good at business. Some will be. Some are not at all. There are some people who have a business that works perfectly well, and as soon as the market conditions change, they just go under because they didn't see it coming. They don't know how to adapt. They're not good at business. So, but the end result, you would suddenly just sack a load of people. So the only way is to have over time, consistently move minimum wage to the point where it is a proper living wage. But for that, you need to stop electing bloody Tory governments, which we don't seem capable of doing. So I think, sadly, until the economy reaches a tipping point globally, whereby we have to fundamentally rewire it, and that has happened before, so I think it will happen again. But until that happens, until there's a serious international look at taxation, we are constantly going to be basically subsidising slave wages. But anyway. But we'll sort of leave it there anyway. I've got to get ready for my next stream now. Last one there. With present rules, if companies paid more than prices would raise to accommodate, so it's a facile argument without changing profit to take a condition. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that's about. With present rules, if companies paid more than prices would raise to accommodate. Oh, do you mean in terms of paying people more wages? Yeah. It's a cost of living crisis. If they would, not all businesses are making massive profits. There's a lot of businesses that are not making huge profits. Even if you think about a small business owner, even if they're on a good wage, like if they were to reduce their own profit and spread it out amongst their workers, they could soon make no profit. And yeah, so and they can only raise their prices so much before they're uncompetitive. That's true. Although I would also say, if you were to force it on them, then they'd still be competitive because everyone else would have to do the same. But it still would result in lots of businesses going under. But it is what it is. But anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a great rest of day. And I should be on Graham's stream in about 20 minutes. Have a great day. Until next time, I'll see you later.